Hey, Christoph here, and I thought today I'd try something a little different. A few months back, I published this book, 12 Upon a Time, a collection of 14 original fairy tales that I wrote, and the book's been fairly well received. I've had a number of people tell me how much they've enjoyed it. One of the things that a lot of people have told me that they really like is when I read the stories, when I read some of my work. I think a lot of people like to sort of put it on kind of bedtime story type thing. So I thought that today I would offer the first installment of reading the audio book of 12 Upon a Time, available on Amazon. There'll be a link here presently for you to take a look at, that you can where you can order the book, and I kind of hope that you do. But in the meantime, I'd like to read the first story of the collection, The Legend of Rabadaba DibbleDash. And this is a story that I wrote for a storytelling festival at an elementary school a few years back. And one of the reasons that I want to do this particular story is that it has a song in it. Tolkien in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings will frequently have songs in there. I've always wondered what it was that he heard in his head when he's writing down the text of the song. What did the song sound like to him? Because I know what it sounds like to me, but what did it sound like to him? So if the way I sing this song in a minute doesn't sound like the way you imagined it, it's okay. Your song is fine too, but this is the way I thought of it. The Legend of Rabadaba DibbleDash. Rabadaba DibbleDash was a troubadour. He had an excellent voice, wonderful stage presence, and most importantly, a 2-wood 3-string balalaika, which he couldn't play. Oh, he made the instrument make noise. Anyone could do that, just by strumming. And Rabadaba DibbleDash could strum. To him, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. When he played, he thought he sounded like the greatest player of the balalaika that there ever was. Unfortunately, his patrons did not agree. They thought it sounded like he was strangling a cat, slowly. The problem was Rabadaba DibbleDash refused to practice, and as everyone knows, if you don't practice, you don't get better. When you aren't any good to begin with, that's a real problem. His songs didn't help. He would sing them very well, but the lyrics were, well, here. I'll show you. This is one of his songs. I am Rabadaba DibbleDash. My dance is fine and my songs are rather dashing. I sing my best when you pay cash to the Rabadaba DibbleDash. I am Rabadaba DibbleDash. I love the ladies and I make them swoon with passion. But I know love will make a hash of the life of Rabadibbldash. I am Rabadaba DibbleDash. Your clothes are dull while I wear the latest fashion. Although this shirt, it makes a rash on the back of Rabadibbldash. I am Rabadaba DibbleDash. Men, listen close, and you ladies bat your lashes. Your gold will start us in a flash with the songs of Rabadibbldash. So ladies and lords, get out your cash and pay Rabadaba DibbleDash. You see what I mean? He often went home with a much smaller bag of coins than he was expecting. This made him somewhat frustrated, and he was often sad. One day he was returning from a performance at a local lord's palace, his bag of gold small and his frustration very large. He was following a path through the woods that led to his house when he noticed a tree that had fallen down. It lay alongside the path, just as if it had been placed there. Rabadaba DibbleDash was very tired, having had a long day and somewhat disappointing, and he stopped to rest on the fallen tree. He had just laid down his 2-wood 3-string Russian balalaika when he heard a voice. "Hello there," the voice said. Rabadaba DibbleDash looked around, but at first he didn't see anyone. Then, at the far end of the log, he spied a little man in a red cap, eating a sandwich. "Hello yourself," said Rabadaba DibbleDash. "Not having the best day," the man said. He took another bite of sandwich. It looked juicy and delicious. "No, I am most certainly not," said Rabadaba DibbleDash. His mouth was beginning to water. The Lord had dismissed him without any dinner. The smell of the roast beef on the sandwich was making his stomach rumble. "If I give you half my sandwich," the man said, "will you tell me your troubles?" Rabadaba DibbleDash would tell his troubles to anyone that would listen, whether they had a sandwich or not, so this was perfectly acceptable. He moved down to where the man was and accepted his half of the sandwich, and related all that had happened at the Lord's manor. He even began to sing a little bit of his song, but the little man stopped him. That's quite all right," he said. "I believe I see how all this came about. You have a lovely instrument there." "Yes, I do. It is a 2-wood 3-string Russian balalaika, my pride and joy." "Will you play it for me?" the little man said. Rabadaba DibbleDash wilted just a little. "I'd really rather not," he said. "When I was young," the man said, "I had a balalaika as well, though it was not so fine as yours. But having a fine instrument does you little good if you do not know how to play it." "That is a problem," Rabadaba DibbleDash conceded sadly. "I will tell you what I will do," the man said. "If you will give me your balalaika, I will give you something that will make you the finest musician in all the world." Although this sounded too good to be true, Rabadaba DibbleDash couldn't pass up such an offer. "Here," he said, handing it over with a sad little smile. "Now, what is this that you will give me?" He could already imagine playing for the finest royal ladies and lords, perhaps one day even for the king and queen themselves. "Hold out your hand," the man said. And Rabadaba DibbleDash did, and the man dropped something into it. It was small and felt like wood. He held it up in the moonlight. It was wood. It looked like a shard of a broken instrument. "What is this?" Rabadaba DibbleDash said, already thinking that perhaps this wasn't such a good trade after all. "It is a piece of a magical violin," the man said, packing up his satchel and slinging the balalaika over his shoulder. "If you take it home and plant it in your garden, you will find that very shortly you have become the greatest musician in all the world." Rabadaba DibbleDash wasn't sure how that could happen, but before he could tell the man in the red hat that he had changed his mind, he blinked, and the man was gone. Well, maybe it would work. He could take it home and try. It was very late when he got there, but he'd given up his most precious possession to get this shard of wood, so he might as well follow the instructions. He took a spade and planted the splinter in the corner of his yard where the rising sun would strike it first. Then he patted the dirt back down and went to bed. He awoke the next morning to the strangest noise outside his house. At first he thought it was some traveling peddler playing his fiddle at a ridiculous hour of the morning, but the more he listened, the more he realized it couldn't be any peddler. The tune was lively, light like a feather, so sprightly it made him want to dance. Quickly he threw on his robe and went outside, and there, in the corner of the garden, was a small tree, not more than a bush, really. It was the tree that was making the sound, because one of the limbs of the tree had grown a violin, and another a bow, and the tree was playing the tune. "This is marvelous," thought Rabadaba DibbleDash. "I wonder if I picked the violin, if the tune would still play." But he didn't want to pick it while he was standing there in his robe, so he went back in the house to change clothes. When he came back out, he noticed that the tree was a little taller and beginning to grow more odd-looking fruit. "Perhaps I'll leave it," he said to himself, "and see what else comes of it. But no matter what, that tree is far too amazing to keep to myself. I shall invite my friend Amanda to come and see it." Off he went to seek his friend, helped along his way by the jolly tune the tree was playing. "Amanda," Rabadaba DibbleDash said, meeting his friend in her garden, "you need to come and see my tree. It's going to make me the greatest musician in all the world." "Your tree is?" Amanda said. "That's very unusual. All my trees do is make apples and peaches. They're delicious, but not very musical." "This is a special tree," he said. "Will you come to dinner and see it tonight?" She said she would, and they set the time. Rabadaba DibbleDash took the last of his money and went to the market to get the ingredients for the best dinner he'd ever made. Would Amanda ever be impressed? By the time he got home, the tree was far taller than he was, and the tune had changed. Instead of the sprightly dancing tune of the morning, it had changed to become slower, more serious, and deeper, as the violin was joined by 2 others, and a viola, and a cello. "Holy smokes," Rabadaba DibbleDash said. "What will grow next? A balalaika? I had better leave it alone and see. Perhaps I will be able to play all the instruments." And he went inside to begin preparing the food. In the afternoon he came out again to check on the tree, and found that it was now taller than his house, and every branch had an instrument. The music was rich and rolling and powerful as the incoming tide. He stood and swayed in the garden, listening to it because he loved music, and this was some of the finest playing he had ever heard. Once again, he left the tree alone, wondering what more it could possibly grow, what music it would play next. Just before sundown, Amanda arrived at his front door. Rabadaba DibbleDash was in the back and heard her call out. "What lovely music," she said. "How delightful. Are you playing it?" "Come out to the garden and see," he said, but before she could, he raced to the back door and covered her ears with his hands. "Now," he said, "listen to this." He removed his hands. The music swelled around her, as moving as an avalanche, filled with every instrument in the orchestra, and a choir to boot. The cascade of sound was mighty like a waterfall and crashed over them both in a magnificent, thundering climax. Amanda applauded, her face shining, and Rabadaba DibbleDash kicked at the dirt, a shy, modest smile on his face. But then she looked at him in some confusion. "I thought you said it was going to make you the greatest musician in all the world." "This is certainly lovely," she said, as the tree launched into another piece. "But I'd much rather hear you play." "I don't think you would," Rabadaba DibbleDash said, and brought out the dinner. Although the accompaniment was excellent, the truth was that the dinner was a rather sad affair. All Rabadaba DibbleDash could think of was Amanda's comment. But then he had an idea. "Watch this," he said, and walked over to the tree. One of the lowest hanging fruits was a violin, playing along with a delightful symphony with the rest of the tree. He plucked it with a little effort and put it under his chin. He put the bow to the violin and waited for something to happen, for the music to come pouring out. But nothing happened. "Silly man," Amanda said. "Music doesn't come from instruments." She wiped her mouth with her napkin and stood up. Slowly she walked over to the crestfallen Rabadaba DibbleDash and said, "It comes from you. Even the violin would play when you held it. Even if the violin would play when you held it, I wouldn't be nearly as interested in what it played unless you were the one who was making the music." And she kissed him on the cheek. "Besides," she said, "what I'd really like to hear is someone play the balalaika." Then she thanked him for the meal and went out of the garden and off toward her home. The tree was a marvel, but it didn't give him what he wanted. Rabadaba DibbleDash knew what he had to do. He laid the violin aside and went inside for a moment. He came out with an axe and began to chop the tree down. One stroke, and the music got wilder. 2 strokes, and the music was frantic, crazed. 3, and the tree toppled over, and the music went silent. The tree had toppled right onto the violin that Rabadaba DibbleDash had plucked. A shard of the violin case landed at his feet. He plucked it from the grass, found his hat and coat, and headed back into the woods. Once again it was dark, and once again the moon shone, and there at last was the long trunk of the downed tree. This time, though, there was no man sitting there in a red cap. Of course there wouldn't be. Defeated, Rabadaba DibbleDash slumped down onto the bark of the tree when he heard a voice. "Well, hello there," it said. And he looked, and there was the man, as if he had appeared from nothing. "I've been looking for you," said Rabadaba DibbleDash. "I want back my 2-wood 3-string Russian balalaika." The little man looked thoughtful. "I don't usually make exchanges," the man said, "unless you have something very unusual to trade." Rabadaba DibbleDash walked up to him and held out the shard of violin. The man looked up at him. "That's very good," he said, "but I'm afraid I will need something more." "I know I can't play it," said Rabadaba DibbleDash, "but I know that I have to try. If I really want to be the finest musician in all the world, I will have to practice." He shuddered. "But that will be better than this. The tree was wonderful, but the music that it played wasn't mine." "Ah," the man said, "humility, diligence. Now that is a rare thing to offer in trade. In that case, I accept." And he plucked the shard from Rabadaba DibbleDash's hand and tipped his cap and vanished. There on the log, right where he'd been sitting, was a 2-wood 3-string Russian balalaika. Rabadaba DibbleDash picked it up and slung the strap over his shoulder. He headed home and started to learn to play. And that is chapter 1 of 12 Upon a Time, the story of Rabadaba DibbleDash. If you liked that, like my post and let me know, and I'll do some more. And perhaps next time we'll go on to All the Marbles, a story about a young man who finds himself transported back into the middle of a war he hardly knew had ever happened. Next time. See you then.